So today we want to talk about this diagram, which we see quite a bit when we're first learning about parallel lines, and that is where we have two parallel lines cut by a transversal. Now I know these are two parallel lines because I've denoted that with these little marks, little arrows somewhere in the middle of the line, and that shows that they're parallel to each other. And again, they're cut by a transversal, which creates a total of 8 angles. Now I've drawn these with different colors. I've labeled the angles with red or blue because if they're red, they're going to be congruent to each other, and if they're blue, they're going to be congruent to each other also. Now, we have different names for some of these angle pairs, and we have special relationships that go along with those. So first, alternate interior angles. Alternate interior angles are on the interior of the parallel lines, and they're on alternate sides of the transversal. So for example, angle 4 and angle 5. And the relationship there is that alternate interior angles are always congruent to each other. So 4 and 5 are congruent. 3 and 6 are also alternate interiors. And so they also have to be congruent to each other. The next one, alternate exterior angles, are again on alternate sides of the transversal, but now they're on the exterior of our parallel line. So for example, angle 2 and angle 7, and those are also going to be congruent to each other. Same with 1 and 8, those are alternate exteriors. And they have to be congruent to each other. The next angle pair relationship are corresponding angles. Corresponding angles are going to be angles, for example, 1 and 5, or 2 and 6, or 3 and 7, 4 and 8. And those will also be congruent to each other. So we have a lot of those. We have 4 pairs of corresponding angles. Again, angle 1 is congruent to angle 5. Angle 2 and 6. Then we had angle 3 and 7. And 4 and 8. Okay, and again, corresponding angles are on the same side of the transversal, and they're just going to be the angles that are corresponding to each other. Okay, so both on the same side of the parallel lines. So both above the parallel lines or both below the parallel lines. Okay. And again, corresponding angles always congruent to each other. The last one, consecutive interior angles, are going to be on the interior of our parallel lines and on the same side. So for example, angle 3 and angle 5. Now the relationship here is different. Okay, these aren't congruent to each other, they're different colors now, but they add up to be 180 degrees, so they're supplementary. So we're going to write angle 3 plus angle 5 equals 180. Same thing with 4 and 6. Okay, so these are the 4 common angle relationships that we'll have. Now, if we're asked about 2 angles in here that don't follow one of those angle pairs, we can still draw conclusions about it. For example, we know angle 1 and angle 4 have to be congruent. They're vertical angles. Angle 1 and 3 are a linear pair. They have to be supplementary. Okay, so if they're not congruent, they have to be supplementary. So if I gave you angle 1 and angle 6, you can look at that, you can eyeball it and say, those 2 angles are not congruent. This is an obtuse angle, this is acute. So we know that since they're not congruent, they have to be supplementary in this case. So that's a neat thing about parallel lines cut by transversal. You have 2 options. If you pick any 2 angles, they either have to be congruent to each other or supplementary. Okay, most of the time you can eyeball it and say, obtuse, acute, they've got to be supplementary. Or obtuse, obtuse, those look like they're the same. They are. They're vertical angles. They're congruent to each other.